Welcome back, everybody. I'm excited for today's deep dive.
Me too, yeah. It's a good one.
Today we're tackling um, a really interesting question, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why religions can look so different, even when they share some of the same core beliefs.
Right.
We're going to be using Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as our main examples today, and looking at how culture and how people have interpreted
Yeah.
those religions, over time, have really shaped how those religions are actually practiced.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to kick us off, for our listeners, can you give us just a quick overview of those three religions? How are they connected?
Well, I think the most interesting thing is they're all monotheistic, right? One God,
Right.
and they all trace their origins back to the prophet Abraham.
Ah,
So that's a really interesting common thread.
that is fascinating. Okay, so one family, but then branching out into all these different ways of expressing that same core belief. Now, I know within Judaism, for example, there are different denominations,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can you tell us a little bit about that? What are some of the main denominations or branches?
Yeah. So you have different groups like the Sephardi Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, and the Mizrahi Jews.
And they're categorized by region or geography, right?
Yeah. So Sephardi Jews, they have roots in Spain and North Africa.
Okay.
Ashkenazi Jews, their roots are in Eastern Europe.
Got it.
And Mizrahi Jews are from the Middle East.
Okay, that makes sense. So as they've migrated and kind of spread throughout the world, they've maintained the same core belief, right, of one God,
Yeah.
but then kind of adapted their practices maybe based on the regions where they were.
Absolutely, like absorbing influences,
Yeah.
from their surroundings
Yeah.
and developing their own unique customs and traditions along the way.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
So they're all connected, right? But then branching out in these different ways, which is pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm curious about the Sabbath.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Sabbath is, it's the Jewish day of rest, and it's observed from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday.
So not just a 24-hour
Yeah.
period. It's tied to the actual sunset.
Yeah.
Right. That's really interesting. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, it's about aligning with those natural rhythms of creation, right?
Okay.
From sunset to sunset. It mirrors, that whole cycle of light and darkness.
Mm.
It's really beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of symbolic.
Yeah, it signifies that separation from the work week,
Right.
a dedication to spiritual reflection,
Yeah.
and family time.
Oh, I love that. So it's more than just okay, clocking out of work. Right. It's this deeper meaning. Now, I know there's also this concept of there are certain things you can't do on the Sabbath.
Yes, you're talking about melachit.
Melachot, yeah, that's it. What are those?
So these are 39 categories of work that are prohibited on Shabbat, and they're based on those activities that were involved in building, the tabernacle in the wilderness.
Okay, so it's not just avoiding general work, but it's these very specific actions.
Right, right.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to wrap my head around this. So, can you give us an example of one of those melachots and maybe how different denominations might interpret it?
Sure, sure. So one example is the prohibition against lighting a fire on Shabbat.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of Jewish families, they'll use a warming plate to keep food warm, right?
Yeah.
So they're not actively cooking. But even the interpretation of what constitutes lighting a fire can vary, right?
Right.
Like some Ashkenazi communities, they might be a little more strict about using electricity on Shabbat
Okay.
compared to some Sephardi communities.
Got it. So it's fascinating, right? It's that same idea, right?
Yeah.
Don't light a fire, but then how that's applied can actually look different, depending on the community or the denomination.
Exactly, yeah.
That's super cool. Okay, so we've talked about some different ways that these practices can be interpreted, but I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about something visual,
Okay.
and that's head coverings. So in Judaism, men often wear a kippah,
Mhm.
which is also known as a yarmulke.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? We're focusing on Judaism today, but Christianity and Islam also have head coverings, right? Like it's a common theme across these religions.
It is. It is.
So can you tell us a little bit about head coverings and what they represent maybe
Yeah.
across these three religions?
Yeah. So, I mean, in Christianity, in some traditions, women wear, veils or hats, especially during, prayer or in sacred spaces.
Right.
And in Islam, many women wear a hijab,
Right.
which covers the hair and neck.
Yeah. Okay. So it's interesting because it seems like it's not just about covering your head, right?
Yeah.
It's tied to these deeper beliefs and traditions.
Yeah, it's very symbolic.
Right. And also like if you look at like how head coverings, even within like say Judaism, right?
Hmm.
How the kippah, like how it looks or the style, like that can tell you something about
Yeah.
the person wearing it.
It can, like a black velvet kippah that might be associated with a more Orthodox community,
Okay.
whereas like a knitted kippah, maybe with some colorful patterns,
Yeah.
that might be worn by somebody from a more liberal background.
I see. So it's like this way of like silently communicating.
Absolutely, it's like a visual representation of their faith,
Right.
but also reflecting those cultural influences and historical context too.
That's so cool. It's like its own language almost.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a reminder that religion like isn't this static thing. It's alive and it changes.
Right. It's constantly evolving and adapting to, to that changing world around us.
That is a really cool way to put it.
Thank you.
Okay, so to wrap things up today, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about.
Okay.
Think about your own family traditions,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're religious or cultural, and think about how those traditions might evolve, in a world that is becoming more and more interconnected.
Yeah, think about it.
Like, will we see like a blending of practices, or will these distinct variations, will those become even more pronounced, as we kind of like share more with each other? It's a really interesting thing to think about, and I'd love to hear our listeners' thoughts.
Yeah, me too.
So thank you so much for joining us for another deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you later.